Imagine a weapon so powerful that it paralyzes entire fleets without ever leaving its hiding place. A weapon that dictates the course of a war from the cold, dark waters of a secluded fjord. This wasn't a phantom or a ghost, but 50,000 tons of German steel and fury, a fortress of a ship that haunted the waking nightmares of Winston Churchill and the entire Allied High Command. This was the story of the Tirpitz, sister to the infamous Bismarck, Hitler's last great battleship, and the target of one of the longest and most desperate hunts in naval history. When the German battleship Bismarck was sunk in the Atlantic in May 1941, it was a stunning victory for the Royal Navy, but it was also a lesson for Adolf Hitler. He had lost his prized capital ship in its very first offensive operation. The loss instilled in him a deep-seated caution, a paranoia about risking his remaining heavy surface units. But one of those units was a monster. The Tirpitz, the second of the Bismarck-class battleships, was even heavier than her sister. Fully loaded, she displaced over 52,000 tons. She was a behemoth, stretching 823 feet, 251 meters long, and bristling with a terrifying array of weaponry. Her main armament consisted of 8 massive 15-inch guns housed in 4 twin turrets, capable of hurling 1-ton shells over 21 miles, 34 kilometers. Backing these up were 12 5.9-inch guns and a dense forest of anti-aircraft cannons. She was, in every sense, one of the most powerful warships on the planet. With the Bismarck gone, the Tirpitz was now the crown jewel of the Kriegsmarine, and Hitler was not about to lose her. Instead of sending her out to raid the Atlantic shipping lanes as originally intended, a new strategy was devised. In early 1942, the Tirpitz was dispatched to the deep, winding fjords of Nazi-occupied Norway. From here, she could achieve 2 critical objectives. First, she could threaten the vital Arctic convoys, the lifeline of ships ferrying essential war materials from Britain and the United States to the Soviet Union on the Eastern Front. Second, she could act as a powerful deterrent against a potential Allied invasion of Norway. She became the centerpiece of what military strategists call a fleet in being. She didn't have to fight to be effective. Her mere existence, her potential to sortie at any moment, was enough. The Royal Navy had to assume that on any given day, the Tirpitz could break out and wreak havoc. The result was a strategic nightmare for the Allies. A huge portion of the British home fleet, including battleships and aircraft carriers, had to be permanently held in reserve, ready to intercept her. The Arctic convoys had to be heavily escorted, draining naval resources from other theaters of war. Winston Churchill himself became obsessed, famously stating, "The destruction or even the crippling of this ship is the greatest event at sea at the present time. No other target is comparable to it." The Tirpitz became known as the Lonely Queen of the North, a beast lurking in its lair, holding the Allies hostage by its very presence. The first attempts to deal with the Tirpitz were costly and frustrating. In March 1942, the Tirpitz did sortie to attack convoy PQ-12. British intelligence got wind of it, and the home fleet, including the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, was scrambled to intercept. In a frustrating game of cat and mouse in the brutal Arctic weather, they never found each other. The Victorious launched a strike with a dozen torpedo bombers, but the antiquated Fairey Albacore biplanes were no match for the ship's defenses and scored no hits. The Tirpitz returned to her fjord unscathed, but the close call only reinforced the Allied belief that she had to be destroyed in her lair. Another plan, Operation Tidal, was hatched in late 1942. This involved using 2-man human torpedoes called chariots to stealthily attack the Tirpitz at anchor. But the mission was a disaster before it even began. The fishing boat meant to smuggle the chariots into Norwegian waters was hit by a storm, causing the torpedoes to break loose from their tow points on the hull. The mission was aborted, a valiant but failed effort that only added to the Tirpitz's growing myth of invincibility. By 1943, the Allies knew they needed a more audacious approach. Conventional bombing had failed, and a direct naval assault into the heavily defended fjords was suicidal. The solution came from one of the most unusual and daring concepts of the war, the X-craft midget submarine. These were tiny, 51-foot, 16-meter-long submarines, each with a crew of 4, designed to penetrate enemy harbors and drop powerful, explosive charges beneath enemy ships. The plan, codenamed Operation Source, was to tow 6 of these X-craft across the North Sea, where they would make their way up the fjords and attack the Tirpitz and other German warships. It was a mission bordering on the suicidal. The journey was perilous, with several X-craft foundering or being scuttled en route. But 2 of them, the X-6 and X-7, succeeded in reaching Fjord, the heavily protected anchorage of the Tirpitz. Under the command of Lieutenant Donald Cameron and Lieutenant Godfrey Place, the 2 crews navigated a minefield, slipped through anti-submarine nets, and dodged listening posts. They managed to get directly underneath the keel of the 50,000-ton battleship. They released their 4 massive 2-ton mines on the seabed below the behemoth and tried to escape. Both crews were ultimately captured, but their charges were set. At 8:12 a.m. on September 22, 1943, the mines detonated. The blasts were immense, lifting the giant battleship several feet in the water. The damage was catastrophic. The explosions buckled hull plates, ruptured fuel tanks, and sent a shockwave through the ship that shattered machinery. The 2 gun turrets were knocked off their bearings, and all of her rangefinders were disabled. While she wasn't sunk, the Tirpitz was crippled. The spiders had bitten the beast, and she was out of the war for at least 6 months. For their incredible bravery, Cameron and Place would later be awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest military honor. While the Tirpitz was undergoing painstaking repairs, the Royal Navy was planning its next move. They knew the X-craft attack was a temporary solution. They needed a knockout blow. The answer, they believed, was to come from the air. Operation Tungsten, planned for April 1944, was the largest carrier-based airstrike ever mounted by the Royal Navy. A fleet of 5 aircraft carriers, escorted by battleships and cruisers, assembled to deliver the blow. The strike force consisted of 40 Fairey Barracuda dive bombers, escorted by 80 fighters. They would attack in 2 waves, hoping to overwhelm the defenses with speed and numbers. On April 3, the attack began. The fighters went in first, strafing the gun emplacements and superstructure, suppressing the lethal German anti-aircraft fire. Then came the Barracudas, screaming down to drop their bombs. They carried a mix of bombs, general purpose, semi-armor-piercing, and anti-submarine bombs. The raid was executed with precision and courage. The Tirpitz was hit 14 times. The bombs tore through the upper decks, starting fires and causing chaos. Over 120 German sailors were killed, and more than 300 were wounded. From the air, it looked like a stunning success. But when the smoke cleared and the damage was assessed, a frustrating reality set in. The Barracudas, in order to aim accurately, had to release their bombs from too low an altitude. The projectiles simply didn't have enough kinetic energy to punch through the Tirpitz's thick main armored deck, which shielded her vital machinery and magazines. The damage was extensive, but it was all superficial. The Lonely Queen had been bloodied and bruised, but her heart was still beating. The raid had only delayed her return to service by another 2 months. The failure of Operation Tungsten led to a fundamental shift in thinking. The Fleet Air Arm had thrown everything it had at the Tirpitz and failed to land a killing blow. The ship's armor was simply too strong for naval dive bombers. A new weapon and a new service was needed. The task was handed over to the Royal Air Force, RF, Bomber Command. Specifically, it was given to 2 elite squadrons, No. 9 Squadron and the legendary No. 617 Squadron, the Dambusters. And they had a very special weapon, designed by the genius engineer Barnes Wallis, the same man who invented the bouncing bomb. This new weapon was the Tallboy. It wasn't just a bomb, it was a concept. The Tallboy weighed a staggering 12,000 pounds, 5,400 kilograms, and was aerodynamically designed to reach supersonic speeds during its fall. It was an earthquake bomb. It wasn't designed to just explode on the surface. It was built to penetrate deep into the earth, or, in this case, the water, before detonating. The goal was to either pierce the thickest armor through sheer kinetic force, or to cause such a massive underwater explosion that it would break the ship's back, much like a torpedo, but from below. The only aircraft capable of carrying it was a specially modified Avro Lancaster bomber. The hunt for the Tirpitz was about to enter its final, brutal chapter. The first RAF attempts in September 1944, Operations Paravane and Obviate, were a mixed bag. They were flown from a forward base in Russia. In the first attack, a single tall boy struck the Tirpitz near the bow, causing immense damage and rendering her unseaworthy. She could no longer steam at high speed. The Kriegsmarine acknowledged defeat. The Tirpitz would never sail on the open sea again. Instead, she was moved south to Hokoya Island, near the city of Tromsø, to be used as a semi-permanent floating gun battery to defend against a suspected Allied landing. This was a fatal mistake. Moving her south put her just within range of Lancaster bombers flying from bases in Scotland. The beast was cornered, and the RAF was coming to finish the job. The final mission was codenamed Operation Catechism. On the morning of November 12, 1944, 32 Lancasters from 9 and 617 squadrons took off from Scotland. There would be no second chances. The weather over Tromsø was clear. As the bombers began their run at over 12,000 feet, 3,600 meters, the Tirpitz's main 15-inch guns opened fire, throwing up huge splashes in a desperate attempt to down the bombers. But the Lancasters flew on, straight and level. The tall boys began to fall. One bomb was a near miss off the port side, exploding in the water and seabed. This was the earthquake effect Barnes-Wallis had envisioned. The massive underwater blast cratered the seabed and ripped a huge hole in the battleship's hull, causing immediate severe flooding. Seconds later, at least 2 more tall boys smashed directly into the ship. One hit the port side amidships, likely failing to penetrate the main armor, but causing significant damage. The other, the fatal blow, struck near C turret, the third of the massive 15-inch gun emplacements. It pierced the armored deck and detonated in a room adjacent to the turret's magazine. The result was a catastrophic internal explosion. A column of fire and smoke erupted from the heart of the ship as the magazine went up. The entire 1,000-ton turret was vaporized. The damage was mortal. The Tirpitz began to list heavily to port. The list increased rapidly, from 20 degrees to 60 degrees in minutes. Below decks, it was chaos as men scrambled to escape the dark, tilting labyrinth of steel. On the hull, sailors tried to climb onto the upturned side. 10 minutes after the first bomb hit, the list became unstoppable. With a final agonizing groan, the mighty Tirpitz rolled completely over and sank into the shallow waters of the fjord, her keel exposed to the sky. The hunt was over. Trapped inside the hull were nearly 1,000 men. Rescue crews worked frantically, cutting holes in the upturned hull to pull out survivors. They managed to save 87 men. But for between 950 and 1,204 of her crew, the Tirpitz became their steel tomb. The legacy of the Tirpitz is one of profound influence, not action. She never sank a single enemy warship. She only fired her main guns in anger once, and not at a ship, but at the approaching Lancaster bombers on the day she died. Yet, for 3 years, she was one of the most important strategic assets of the Third Reich, and a constant, gnawing source of anxiety for the Allies. Her existence cost the Allies dearly in resources, time, and lives, shaping the entire war in the Arctic. She was a weapon whose power came from what she could do, a ghost that haunted the Royal Navy until the very end. After the war, a Norwegian company spent the next decade slowly breaking up the massive hull for scrap, erasing the lonely Queen of the North from the fjord, but not from the pages of history. The hunt for the Tirpitz was one of the great naval and air power sagas of World War II, a testament to both the power of a fleet in being and the relentless determination required to destroy it. But the Tirpitz wasn't the only legendary machine that became an obsession for its enemies. What piece of military hardware, legendary vessel, or seemingly indestructible fortress do you think deserves its own deep dive? Drop your mission briefings for us in the comments section below, because your ideas often become our next feature. And if you want to be on board for our next journey into military history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. You won't want to miss what we're investigating next.